call the February 27th meeting of the Planning Commission to order and get started with the flag salute.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And then, I believe our first order of business is to select a chair and vice chair.
I think that the chairperson has been doing a fine job, and I should continue to do so.
Is anyone else interested?
Well, I agree with the commissioner. I think you've been doing a great job, but you really fulfilled a very important function last year. And so if you're not willing to do so, or do not want to do so, why?
Are you willing to do it?
Well, it sounds like self-aggrandizement, but the planning director reminded me that I said something rash last year.
You did.
And I thought you would probably remember it.
I do recall that.
I would be willing to do it but I'd prefer that you continue.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add to this?
I in total agreement with everybody that you're doing an excellent job, and I would recommend that you do it. Continue doing it unless you have reservations about doing so.
I agree with everybody else. You're hoping for a different.
And Tim, would you continue to be the vice chair?
I would. Somebody needs to make a
I'll
motion.
make a motion to keep you as chair, Tim as vice chair.
I
Yeah.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And I'd like to motion that Tim continue as the vice chair.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, I guess we'll get back on track here. Thank you. Do we have any agenda changes?
No, we do not.
This is an opportunity for the public to comment on any item that would be of interest to the Planning Commission but is not on the agenda today. Is there anyone interested? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda.
Can I make just a statement? Because of public comment, for years we've had Patricia Gordo was always here, and I just want to mention she's going to be greatly missed. She passed away this last week, and I know we didn't always agree with her, but she seemed like she was part of our meetings, part of the supervisor
And
meetings.
very definitely a
Just wanna-
dedicated citizen.
Dedicated
Yes.
citizen. I mean, she spoke from her heart, and I just want to remember her today.
Thank you. I was unaware of that.
Yeah, I just became aware of it yesterday.
Now we'll move on to the consent agenda. Do we have anything?
The minutes,
I don't see any minutes.
January 23rd.
Yeah, there they are. Got them. Are there any corrections, comments?
None from me.
Nope.
None. Make a motion to accept the minutes of the previous meeting.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I should abstain, I was not here. And we will move on to the regular agenda, item 2019-084, Plan Development Permit for A&R Signs Incorporated.
Thank you. As you said, this is a plan development permit for A&R Signs. The project in question is located at 2011 Highway 4 in Arnold, on the northeast corner of the intersection of Highway 4 and Country Club Drive. The permit is to construct a 7-foot 9-inch tall monument sign for Meadowmount Lodge. The parcel in question is Zone C2 PD, which is General Commercial Plan Development. The proposed sign is permitted in the C2 zone. However, the PD combining zone requires that a more detailed county review and encourages the focus on aesthetics and quality of the project. Because this project is not just a change in copy, but an entirely new sign altogether, a PD permit is required. To approve a PD permit, the performance standards must be met. These standards cover the design and aesthetics, landscaping, refuse storage, screening, standards specific to signs, mechanical and rooftop devices, and access and parking. These performance standards shall apply to all construction within the plan development combining district for which the permit is required. The only construction proposed for this project is for the sign itself, so many of these standards simply do not apply. First off, the addition of the sign includes no need for any additional refuse storage. Screening also does not apply because the sign needs to be seen by its very nature. The sign is not a rooftop or mechanical device, nor does it require any to be added. And finally, the lodge is already meeting the code's parking requirements of 1 parking space for each unit plus 2. The project is not adding any room, so the parking needs are not changing. The first performance standard that we will discuss at length is section 17.50.0, in section 17.50.060, it requires the sign to be compatible with the project location and its natural environment, or any architectural characteristics specified in a community plan. Because the Board of Supervisors approved the updated county general plan, the 1998 Arnold Community Plan is now obsolete, so all we have to go on is that the sign must be compatible with its location and the natural environment. In evaluating the existing commercial development in the vicinity, overall, most development in Arnold has a kind of a woodsy, alpine feel to its design. However, because the development has occurred somewhat slowly over a period of many years, the buildings in the area of Arnold where the Meadowmount Lodge is located, they're constructed with varying materials, varying colors, varying architectural styles. When looking at the commercial structures closest to the lodge, however, a common design feature is present. There is a small shopping center directly to the south and a brew pub across the highway to the west. They use stone facades as a design element. The lodge itself and the base of the current sign also have stone. The proposed sign is utilizing stone to aesthetically tie it to the existing lodge as well as adjacent commercial structures. And as the stonework on the base of the sign ties it to the local architectural styles found in the immediate vicinity, the sign itself is compatible with the natural environment. The previous sign for the lodge was wooden, as are many other signs in the area, and the brown color and pattern of the proposed sign is designed to mimic wood and blend with local forest. This design choice will allow the sign to better conform to the natural environment. Another performance standard in the PD combining zone is landscaping. Commercial development in The PD zone is required to include 10% of the gross disturbed area to be planted in landscaping, with a maximum effort being made to retain all trees over 12 inches in diameter. The proposed sign occupies a footprint of 10.5 square feet, which would require just over 1 square foot of landscaping The site currently has existing commercial landscaping, natural vegetation, including many mature evergreen trees, which combines to equal approximately 30% of the total area of the parcel, which far exceeds this 10% requirement. Removal of existing vegetation is not being proposed, and due to the large amount of existing landscaping on the site, we're not requiring an additional 1 foot of landscaping to be planted. As for requirements specific to signs, all signs in the plan development zone are required to comply with the county sign code found in chapter 17.72. For on-site signs, sign area for single businesses located on a parcel with no other businesses shall not exceed 1 square foot of sign area for each linear foot of structure frontage. The sign cannot block ingress or egress or access, and no animated or blinking signs are allowed without a conditional use permit. As for size, the frontage minimum lodge on Highway 4, if you look at the aerials, it's about 90 feet, which would allow about 90 feet of signage. The proposed sign is 28 square feet on each side. Because the sign's double-faced, we have to count that area twice, which would give a total area of 56 square feet, well within the allotted size. The sign itself is not physically blocking any ingress, egress, or other access points. You can see it there in red where the new sign will be. Its location on the parcel also leaves ample sight distance to the highway. To illustrate this, if you look at the car there on Country Club Drive in the aerial, if we take that and move it up to the intersection, as you can see, the view to the highway is not impacted in any way. So to finish off sign requirements, the proposed sign is not animated and it does not blink. So that we don't even have to worry about. As for environmental review, a notice of exemption has been prepared for the project. Article 19, categorical exemptions, section 15311A allows for the construction or replacement of minor structures accessory to existing commercial, industrial, or institutional facilities, including but not limited to on-premise signs. These are exempt from the provisions of CEQA, and the proposed project is a sign on the premises of an advertised commercial business. So obviously it fits that exception. To conclude, this permit is a total replacement of an existing sign. The architectural design of the sign is compatible with the local character of Arnold and its natural environment. The landscaping and natural vegetation currently existing on the property exceeds the minimum requirements for all development on the parcel and will be preserved. The sign will be within the allowed size and meets all other requirements for commercial signs. And the proposed project is exempt from CEQA. Due to this, staff recommends that you approve Resolution 2020-004 to approve this permit for the new sign for Minimum Lodge.
We would like to add one finding that we overlooked when preparing the staff report, that is consistency with the general plan, and I have some proposed language that we would like to add to that resolution. It would be a new finding, finding number 6. The proposed plan development is consistent with the general plan, and the evidence is the proposed sign is compatible with the character of the community, consistent with goal LU-4, policies LU 4.1, 4.3, and 4.7, requiring compatibility with natural, historic, and scenic resources of the county, period. The sign is consistent with policy COS 5.3, encouraging design features that complement the scenic qualities of the surrounding area. So I'd just like to add that as part of the findings.
I don't have any questions for the staff, but I just want to commend the planning director and Scott Spear for the thoroughness that you put into hey, this is the sign, it looks good, doesn't it? Yeah, that looks good. You have all the criteria that we have to consider, and you forced us to consider them. And I really think this is an example of the quality of the work that we get from the planning department, except for that 1 square foot of landscaping. I'm a little concerned about that.
That already exists.
Right.
Yes.
Actually, anyway.
Thank you.
So, I understand we needed an indemnification agreement, is this?
It's done.
Is it
It's
done?
done.
Okay, so we're all set. Okay. Does anyone have any questions for Scott on the extraordinarily thorough report?
Is this new sign going to be in about the same location as the old one?
Just about to be a little bit over to, closer to the street, just a hair, but basically the same spot.
So the old sign will come down?
Yes.
And the base of the old sign, will that disappear, or will that just stay?
Yeah, new base.
New base. About the sign size, it's variously described as 7 foot 9 inches and 4 feet by 7 feet. I assume 7 foot 9 inches is the height.
4 feet 9 inches is the total height, including the base. The sign itself is 4 feet high. So
Right.
when we are looking at sign size requirements, it's the actual size of the sign itself, not including the base.
And the sign itself is 7 by 4.
Yes.
And what were the dimensions of the old sign?
I don't know the exact dimensions. I do have a picture.
A little skinny.
It's not the scale, but to give you an idea of,
I can help out.
she can do it.
Okay.
The existing sign, the total.
Could you come up to the microphone and state your name for the record? Thank you.
Good morning, Erin with Ainer Signs. The existing sign is roughly 12 feet tall. I don't have an overall length, but I believe it's around 15 feet long, including the stone base, but it's 12 feet tall.
Okay.
That's
So
all
I
I
don't
have.
have a problem with this.
I just have a question on there. What material is the actual sign going to be made out of?
It's an aluminum with an aluminum angle iron structure. And the exterior, I know the image doesn't really do it justice, but to get the true natural effect, it's actually a patina. So it's not painted, it's not a faux vinyl that's going to start to degrade. It's going to maintain that look forever because it's a natural process with the aluminum. So
Thank
Which
you.
is kind of mimicking Corten steel, is that kind of?
Mhm.
Yeah.
yeah, but more practical for this
Right.
yeah,
No
application.
No rusty drips.
Yes, exactly. And it's going to be clear coated, so it'll stay like that forever.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions for Erin before she gets all the way sat down? Thank you. Would the applicant like to say anything else?
Approve our signs,
Thank you. Are we ready to hear the recommendation?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, staff recommends that you approve resolution 2020-004 for the design of a new sign on Minimum Lodge as amended.
So moved.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes 5-0. Congratulations. Looking forward to the new sign.
Thank you guys, I appreciate it. And you
So this action is final unless appealed within 15 calendar days to the Board of Supervisors.
I do have one question. Will we now be able to submit to building and finalize the permit process?
We actually have to wait the 15-day appeal period. Not that it's likely that anyone's going to appeal. You can certainly submit the plans, and as soon as that appeal period is over, then we can issue the permit. So it's 15 calendar days.
Madeline is going to lead us on our next item, 2019-077 zoning amendment for Richard DeCarmi?
Ducharme.
Ducharme.
Very French.
Sorry about that.
Just a second here. The applicant's son, Evan, is on his way. He's just got stuck in traffic this morning. I believe he was traveling from the Bay Area. He should be here right about now. All right. Good morning. Good morning. Madeline Flandreau, Planner 2. This morning I'm presenting the zoning amendment 2019-077 for Richard Ducharme. The applicant is requesting approval of a zoning amendment from rural residential with a 20-acre minimum to residential agriculture with a 20-acre minimum. And it is for a parcel that is 34.23 acres in size. The subject parcel is APN 021-004-078, which is highlighted on the map here, which is located at 6640 Railroad Flat Road in Mountain Ranch. This is the county aerial image from 2018. I believe it's February 2018. The parcel, you need to sort of excuse the stretch. I don't know if you can see the fence line where this point in comes in, but the red line is actually covering the, covering the residence. There's a single family residence, and then the area that is cleared is the former commercial cannabis cultivation site. The purpose of the rezone is for the applicant to continue to use the land for commercial cannabis cultivation under the new regulatory ordinance, as the RR zone is not included as an allowed zone classification under the new ordinance. A little background on this parcel. This is parcel map 899 from 1979, which subdivided an 80-acre parcel into 4 parcels, 2 5-acre parcels, which are the smaller ones on the right-hand side, one 41.88-acre parcel, which is parcel A on the left, and the subject parcel, which is identified as parcel B, which is 34.23 acres. This parcel map was approved concurrently with a zoning amendment, which rezoned the parcels from unclassified to RR5 for the 2 small parcels and RR20 for the 2 largers. The parcel is designated by the general plan as working lands. This designation identifies lands suitable for agricultural and forestry practices on parcels with a density of 20 to 40 acres per lot, and includes lands with a combination of residential and home-based businesses. These lands allow the continuation of small-scale resource production and other rural home-based business operations that are compatible with rural residential development. The RR zone is intended to provide lands for personal ranches, in which residential use is the primary land use, and is established to permit small-scale farming primarily for personal use and not as the primary use for the property. Whereas the RA is a resource zone, which is intended to be a district in which equal emphasis is assigned to residential and agricultural uses, and is to provide lands for small-scale and personal-scale farming and ranching, as well as larger residential parcels. Both RR and RA are compatible zoning classifications in the working lands designation. Therefore, the request to rezone the property is consistent with the land use designation. The subject parcel being 34 acres meets the minimum parcel size requirements of 5 acres in the RA zone as well. General Plan Goal LU2 is to provide a land use pattern that allows those who own, operate, or manage the productive resources in the county to maintain open space, wildlife habitat, agricultural lands, mineral resources, and forests. Utilizing a parcel productively helps maintain the open space. Therefore, encouraging larger parcels to have agricultural uses allows more opportunity for the owners to use and maintain the land. This project is also consistent with General Plan Policy LU 3.6, which adhering to the density, land use intensity, and water and sewage disposal standards as set forth in the land use element. Another goal of the General Plan LU5 is for the county to have a strong and diversified economic base through the creation, retention, expansion, and attraction of business, agriculture, and industry. Rezoning to RA, which is a resource zone, gives the ability for the parcel to be more economically viable than one with an RR zone, which provides little economic benefit to the county due to its limited uses. This area of Mountain Ranch is primarily classified as U, which is depicted here in light blue. The county is in the process of reviewing all the parcels classified as U, which is an interim zone, in order to rezone them to a classification which is consistent with the 2019 general plan. The surrounding parcels here in lime green are working lands, and light blue is rural transition B. And I went ahead and made this figure where I identified the acreage of the parcel so you could kind of get a sense. The surrounding U zone parcels will likely be rezoned to a mix of A1, RR, and RA. And I want to just clarify, the area where you see the dark pink line to the left and to the upper right corner of the screen, that's basically encompasses the entire U zone. There are also the parcels in red. There's one RC, and then on the left-hand side you can see the ag preserve. Everything else is zoned unclassified except for, of course, the RR20 and the RR5s, which are part of the original 80 acres. The parcels designated as working lands in the lime green are larger parcels, 20 acres or greater, and they are proposed to be rezoned to A1. The parcels designated as rural transition B, which are 10 acres or greater, are proposed to be rezoned to RA, and the parcels less than 10 acres in size are proposed to be rezoned to RR. Therefore, the zoning amendment will not conflict with the future surrounding zoning classifications. I also wanted to discuss Chapter 1795 as the applicant is interested in applying for a permit to continue to cultivate. The Board of Supervisors adopted a new ordinance on October 22nd, 2019, regulating the cultivation of cannabis, which will allow commercial cultivation on parcels of 20 acres or more, which are zoned U, RA, A1, AP, and GF. The number of cultivation permit applications that will be accepted by the county is limited to the number of growers who previously registered under the urgency ordinance program, had not withdrawn the registration or had it denied, and had either received a state license or had a state license application submitted and in process before being halted when the previous countywide ban went into effect. The applicant meets all this criteria, and the parcel meets the acreage requirement of the ordinance, besides the zoning, of course. Section 1795010B states it is also the purpose and intent of this chapter to develop reasonable regulations to prevent commercial cannabis cultivation in higher density residential zones, to minimize its impact on residents, but also to provide those state-compliant commercial medical cannabis cultivators who complied with the May 10th, 2016 version of this chapter an opportunity to apply for commercial cannabis cultivation permit under this current chapter, and, if necessary, to either apply for compatible zoning designations for their parcels, relocate available parcels with compatible zoning, relocate to available parcels with compatible zoning, or transfer their permit or right to apply for their permit to another qualified person or entity with an eligible and compliant site. The applicant has chosen to try to remain at the current site in Mountain Ranch instead of relocating and establishing a new cultivation site, which is, therefore lessening impacts. A negative declaration was prepared and circulated for 30 days from January 7th to February 7th, 2020. No, the environmental review did not reveal any significant impacts, and no comment letters were received. So to conclude, the proposal is to rezone from RR20 to RA20. The RA zone is consistent with the general plan land use designation. The parcel is 32 acres in size, which meets the minimum parcel size requirements for the RA zone. The rezone will not conflict with the future surrounding zoning classifications once we rezone all the unclassified parcels. And it is consistent with the goals and policies of the general plan, which encourages larger parcels to have uses which allow more opportunity to use and maintain the land. And in addition, the rezone to RA would allow the applicant to apply for a permit under 1795 and allow him to continue to use the land as it was used previously. And Evan Ducharme is here, right on time, if you have any questions for him.
Does anybody have any questions for Madeline?
Yes. The two parcels to the southeast of this parcel are zoned RR, is that right?
To the southeast. The two 5-acre parcels that were originally part of the,
Yeah.
yes,
And then the two parcels directly to the east, I think you just pointed out, are 5 acres, so they will be rezoned RR.
yes,
So
Yes.
people can obviously build on those RR parcels.
sorry, say that one more time.
People can build on those RR
Build,
parcels.
yes, absolutely.
And what's the allowed density on an RR? Half acre?
Half acre,
Except that with this land use designation, it's a 5-acre minimum.
yes, thank you.
5 acre minimum?
Yeah.
The staff report says that the zoning amendment is necessary in order for the applicant to continue to use the existing site for cultivation. Is cannabis being cultivated there now?
No,
But it was before.
yes.
Probably reactivate would have been a better word than
Yeah.
continue.
That's what I thought when I read it.
Yeah.
And the initial study and negative declaration relies at least in part on the EIR that was certified and the addendum. Is that right?
Peter, do you want to?
Yes, that's true. We did rely on the information from the EIR, the Cannabis Ordinance EIR, and its addendum.
Although we are not looking at cannabis at all here, we are looking only at the zone change. So it's only the environmental effect of the zone change.
Well, we have to look at what are the potential uses that could occur as a result of this zone change. And the primary difference is the ability to cultivate cannabis. That cultivation would need to then meet all of the requirements of 1795 and all the mitigation measures identified in the EIR for an individual cultivation site.
It also allows other things that are allowed on RA, the more commercial level, agricultural, small operations, right? There's some agritourism things and that would also.
Right, that's correct, and we looked at that, and because of the parcel size, the agritourism and special events that are allowed in the RA zone are also allowed in the RR zone because it's over 20 acres.
So that is the only significant.
That's really the only significant change. There's some minor, you could have a farm stand or something like that wouldn't be allowed in the RR, but other than that, for the most part, the uses are identical.
Thank you.
Well, the staff report makes it clear that the ordinance, the board did adopt the ordinance allowing, regulating the cultivation of cannabis, and the RR zone is not included as an allowed zoning classification under that. And for that reason, the applicant is requesting the zoning amendment, so I don't think we can blind ourselves to that's the reality. That's what the staff report tells us.
Right.
And the fact that other uses may be permissible is correct, but the purpose that's being put forth here is cannabis. All right, now, going to the negative declaration. There's a section on air quality on page 11. And it says the proposal does not include a plan for development, but, as I said, it does include a purpose or proposal to grow cannabis. And when we're talking about air quality, we're including odors. And so would it not be the case that under this proposal, it is to be expected that odors, not the kind created by typical farming activities, are going to be created? I would say that that's the case. And with respect to biological resources, there will have to be fencing around the cultivation site, as I understand the cannabis ordinance. Was there any study done to determine whether fencing here would interfere substantially with the movement of any wildlife species or with established wildlife corridors? And that comes up on page 12 of the initial study / negative declaration. I don't see one here. If there has been one, I'd like to know about it.
So this is where we relied on the information in the EIR and the addendum for the cannabis ordinance that one found that there would be significant cumulative effects, and the board made statements of overriding consideration for the potential for odors. It was minimized by the parcel size, but they found that, or the EIR found that it could not be fully eliminated, and therefore it was considered significant and unavoidable. Same, and then with the fencing issue and the movement of wildlife, the finding was that it would be less than significant because of the small amount of area that would likely be fenced due to cannabis cultivation, on a 1 acre of cultivation on 20 acres of property, that was not a significant impediment to wildlife movement.
Well, the EIR itself, at the time it was done, the maximum cultivation area permitted on a parcel was 22,000 square feet. And that got up to an acre.
On 2 acres.
Yeah.
And now it's
It's
up
an
to 1
acre on 20. And that was addressed in the addendum.
Okay, with respect to noise, the initial study / negative declaration on page 21 says sound from any ag operations subject to chapter 14.02 of the county code is exempt from the county's noise ordinance. That's on page 21. So the discussion A to C, no impact. But doesn't the cannabis ordinance, section 17.95.030, provide that no cannabis cultivation shall be deemed an agricultural operation for purposes of Title 14 and Title 15 of the Calaveras County Code? And so it's not exempt as I understand this, from the county's
That's absolutely correct, and, in this, here we are looking at all of the potential uses that could occur in the RA zone, so there are agricultural activities that could occur. Again, the EIR for the cannabis ordinance found that noise was less than significant because of the mitigation measures that were imposed that, prohibited the use of, delivery of water by trucks and prohibited the use of generators. It probably, and we don't need to necessarily amend, but I think if we want to make additional statements to that effect, in the findings supporting the resolution. I mean, if where we've made statements that it's, it satisfies CEQA, we could certainly add additional language to clarify that. At this point, if we've talked about several different issues where it wasn't really clear in the negative declaration that was sort of the basis of our recommendation. And it's not required in CEQA that we recirculate a negative declaration if there is additional information, but it's good to have it on the record, and so we can, the information that we've discussed is now part of the record, but to make it clear if we want to add some additional language, were you to approve this, that would be appropriate in the resolution itself.
Okay, that's my comments and questions on this particular initial study and negative declaration. And I do, however, have some things to say about the reliance on the EIR and the addendum in some particular respects. So I can go into those now, and then the applicant will be able to respond to everything I have to say if he so chooses, and the fellow commissioners can
I think go ahead and get it
provide
out
comments
there,
on
and then
everything.
everyone else will have an opportunity to comment also. So let's go ahead and complete your comments.
Okay.
Then we won't have to repeat them if we have the same comments.
Yeah, well, I think this is the first application to come before the commission involving the ordinance regulating cannabis since it's been enacted.
No.
No, but it is the
That
first
is
one
changed.
where it's a rezone from RR. The previous one was for Kevin Clay, which I think I brought to you in September.
You're right
And
about
he had
that.
4 40-acre unclassified parcels that he rezoned to A1. He also had additional agricultural uses that he was proposing.
Yes.
Goats.
I remember that one, he never proposed.
He didn't propose cannabis, though.
No, that was not proposed on that. It was for raising goats and sheep.
No, it was for the continuation of the cannabis cultivation
not
as
in
well
it.
as an apple orchard.
Because I brought that up and I was told, no, that was for goats and sheep. And
There was one with
the ordinance hadn't
goats
passed yet.
also on the property now.
No.
He was also doing
That was Ifatu's rezone for, that was the Paloma Farms. That was a different, yes. And he stated, yes, that applicant stated that he did not intend to use the parcel for cannabis cultivation. But the last one I brought before you was for Kevin Clay. And there were 2 cultivation sites. There were 3 adjacent, it's off of Maranatha, way out Jesus Maria Road, and there were 3 40-acre parcels that were adjacent with 2 cultivation sites on them, and the proposal was to continue to use it for cultivation as well as put in an apple orchard.
But this is the first rezone, isn't it?
This is the first rezone from RR.
Okay.
His parcels were unclassified.
But you can grow cannabis on an unclassified,
Yes, and he
so it didn't matter.
did not want to wait for us to rezone the parcels for him. Kevin Clay applied for his rezone prior to the adoption of the new regulatory ordinance, and he was concerned that unclassified was going to be omitted in the final document. And he also wanted to start establishing an apple orchard, so he wanted to come before us and apply for the rezone himself.
Okay, the first subject that concerns me here is hydrology and monitoring requirements. And there's been a change in the requirements from both the DEIR and the drafts that were submitted to the Planning Commission and the drafts that the Planning Commission recommended to the board. The DEIR found that the impacts to groundwater supplies in the county would be potentially significant. That's the finding. And it proposed a mitigation measure that consisted of monitoring at the water supply source and any nearby wells that could be affected by the consumption of water at the source well, to be determined by a qualified well driller or a hydrologist. And there were to be tests monthly during August, September, and October. And if there was continuous decline of water levels was observed over a period of 3 consecutive years in the source well, then an alternative water source had to be procured. And then based on comments by CCWD, that 3 years was not long enough. The final EIR changed the period of monitoring from 3 to 5 years. And the addendum reflected that change. And CCWD's position that the impacts of total water use may not be very big was based on the cap on outdoor grows of 22,000 square feet. But then the size increased to an acre, which increased the impact. One version or another of the mitigation measure that I described was incorporated in the draft ordinance. And each required monitoring by well testing one time each month between August and October, showing that there had not been a continuous decline over a period of 3 years, or if you followed the addendum, 5 years. And if there was, the applicant had to come up with an alternative water source, had to show when it had been procured. The ordinance as adopted did not include that mitigation measure. It did increase the period of monitoring to 5 years, which the addendum had said had been done, but it hadn't, but that got fixed. But it changed the annual testing from once each month, over 3 months, August to October, to one time only per year in September. And it deleted any requirement to procure an alternative water source if the well was declining. Instead, you had to procure an alternative water source only if an adequate supply of water for the cannabis operation wasn't available. So now it doesn't matter under this ordinance if the well is going down, 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 with the potential effect on other people's wells, so long as the cannabis operation still has enough water. And of course, if they don't, they'd have to get another source of supply anyway. But that kind of leaves the neighbors out there with a water table dropping and nothing to do about it. That's a major change in my view from the mitigation measure that was approved under the EIR and dealt with in the addendum. And it seems to me that that's going to have a substantial increase in the severity of a previously identified potentially significant impact to groundwater supplies, which the mitigation measure proposed to reduce to a less than significant level through its terms, which have been abandoned. So we either have a substantial change in the project, and in my judgment requires a supplemental EIR, or we have a failure to adopt a mitigation measure that is not shown to be infeasible, with no explanation as to why not. That's the first problem I have. Another change in the project from that was analyzed in the environmental impact report and the addendum is allowing co-location of multiple permitted premises on a single parcel with an acre of canopy per 20 acres of parcel size and no other limit as to the number or location. Because the original DEIR considered a project in which the cultivation area was up to 22,000 square feet per parcel. Now that change would seem to increase the potential significant environmental effects that were already increased by allowing outdoor cultivation up to an acre of canopy as compared to 22,000 square feet that was specified in the original project and analyzed in the environmental impact report. So now with this co-location, you could have a number of cultivation areas grouped together, so long as you don't have more than one per 20 acres in a parcel. 100-acre parcel, you could have 5 cultivation areas, and they can be anywhere the cultivators want to have them. That's a change. I think a substantial change. And it has the environmental effects on at least these matters, on noise. The draft environmental impact report commented that given that the planning area would not exceed 22,000 square feet, use of large tractors is not anticipated. Now it's an acre, twice as much, and those could be concentrated in several acres. Biological resources, fencing was going to be restricted to the cultivation area, which was up to a half acre per site, so that would not preclude movement of wildlife. Now it's up to an acre. Co-location complicates that even more, and it hasn't been analyzed. The addendum did not analyze it, and neither did the environmental impact report, because it didn't exist back then when that report was done. And the last is odors. The environmental impact report pointed out that generally the larger the size of the canopy area, the greater the potential for odors to be evident to off-site receptors. Co-location increases that potential, on top of the increase from 22,000 square feet to an acre. Now, when this came before the commission earlier, I had other comments about the changes in the circumstances, being essentially when the draft environmental impact report was done, there was no regulation of cultivation. There were many, many, many unregulated sites. It was not a good situation. Then the urgency ordinance came in, and then the ban, and things changed. Things got more under control, and we had numbers given us by the sheriff and code compliance as to the extent of that. I'm not going to repeat any of that. I've said it all before, but it still stands, and that's because of what I've just said. I have problems approving this environmental document. I'm done.
Okay.
For the moment.
Next.
It states here that this is in an area of the county known for having moderate groundwater potential, and I'm not sure what moderate means. And then it says that there is the well is sufficient to provide for the parcel's needs, and I'm not sure how you come up with that statement as far as it relates to cannabis, because we're doubling the size of the grow, twice the water need that was there before. Have current testing been done on the wells? Have drawdown tests been done on any nearby wells to see what the effect on those wells are? You know, I think that's a real potential here. And again, we talk about odors. You've got two rural residential lots right next to where it looks like the grow previously was. They're going to be affected by odors twice as much now because it's going to an acre. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting those two, 7 potential, we got 5 more potential rural residential lots that are going to be right next to this property. These are all going to be affected by odors. I know where I live, we had grows, you know, half a mile away, 3/4 mile away from us, and we were affected by the smell. That's going to be a definite impact on these RR. And that was one of the reasons why we didn't want this in residential, anything with an R on it. Originally, that's what we fought for, was nothing with an R. And obviously that got changed, and I just don't think this is an appropriate spot for a cannabis grow with all these other rural residential lots around it. And the potential, when you're only saying we have a moderate groundwater potential, I'd feel much more comfortable if you said we have, you know, great groundwater potential here. So I think that because of that, I can't support this change in zoning. I think it should stay RR.
You're going to have an opportunity.
Soak it all in.
I think what we're losing sight of, some of the points were valid points, but we're losing sight of the zoning change from RR to a RA, just the zoning, regardless of what it's going to be used for. It's, you know, you did bring up some valid points. However, this is, what we're looking at is just the zoning amendment. And I have,
That would be
just
true
change
if
it.
that wasn't stated, a specific use for this property.
I understand that.
It's being
I do
amended
understand.
for this use, so you can't ignore that.
Can you let me finish, please? So therefore, I don't see an issue with this. The EIR and that sort of thing is, when it comes down to the cannabis ordinance, needs to be addressed. But this, to propose our rural residential to RA, I don't see an issue with it. That's my comment.
I think we have, I mean, subject to further exposition by the applicant and the staff, my general impression is that we have exactly what the cannabis ordinance had in mind as far as this is the type of property that it was aiming to permit to have cannabis grow on it, and avoid the complications of somebody having to move from a previous cannabis grow to some new property somewhere that would satisfy all the conditions of the ordinance. So I have some specific questions, but overall, this looks to me like what the current county law has in mind for a cannabis grow parcel. But I do have some questions. And then I have real concerns about the environmental document. I think that's a separate issue, but we'll get to that. Could you, for the record, just explain on pages 3 and 4, when you're talking about minimum densities, just what you mean when you say there's the minimum density currently for RR is 0.5 acres. Density of what?
As in a minimum parcel size. So we have 3 categories.
Okay, so that density is a synonym for parcel size.
Yes, yes.
Okay. I didn't know if it was
For
density of residential buildings on the parcel or anything else, it's just parcel size. Okay. Then I also had the question on page 5 about the well is currently sufficient to provide for the parcel's needs. The way that's phrased, that's the current usage of the parcel, which does not include cultivation of marijuana. Is that correct? I guess I should say cannabis, keep this elevated.
In my mind, it was both, because that was the well that was previously used. I believe there's a domestic well for the home and an ag well for the...
And we put the well the year prior to the ban, so it's a new well.
It's a new well.
So, yeah, you could clarify that when we get to it. On page 11 of the negative declaration, you have the table 1 and table 2, and then in the paragraph below those tables, you have a sentence that about the middle of the paragraph, considering the analyzed project at 150 vehicle trips per day fell so far below the thresholds, it is estimated that the uses in the RA zone will likewise not exceed the established thresholds. I don't know what are you talking about? You're anticipating 150 vehicle trips to this parcel when they're cultivating cannabis? I just don't understand the point you're trying to make there.
What we did was we had our Air Quality Management District run a model using 150 trips in order to have some data to provide you to show the emissions for 150 vehicle trips. That's a grossly estimated number. It's just what we had handy to show you that there's no way that a cultivation site could ever exceed 150 vehicle trips per day. It's just that's the data that we had on hand from the Air Quality Management District. It's really hard for us to take an individual cultivation site and come up with data to plug into this model to estimate what the emissions would be for a specific proposed site.
So if I could expand on that a little bit, when we have a larger project, a subdivision or an industrial use, you typically would put, there's a model exercise we go through to calculate the various air quality or air pollutant components. And it's based primarily on vehicle trips per day. And so say if you have, 100 unit subdivision at 7 to 10 trips a day, that's, you do the math, and then that's plugged into this model. If you have an industrial use that has certain kinds of, what's the term? Pollutants that emit emissions, was the word I was looking for, then that also is plugged in. How many pounds of certain, chemicals are used, what's the, all of the activity associated with the various equipment that's being used in that operation. And so we use that as sort of a baseline. We have a threshold that's been established through the Air Quality Management District. And we said, okay, well, we know the numbers for 150 trips a day. That's been run before. So we use that as sort of a comparison to what would be proposed with this. And the number of trips, would be maybe 1/10 of that amount. And what we're saying is that, because 150 trips is well below the threshold
Now,
of
can you
significance.
explain threshold? I mean, again, are we looking at this parcel?
We're looking at generally, if you emit certain amount of tons of, reactive organic gases or nitrous oxides, that there's a level that's been established that says if you emit this level, this threshold, you are now a significant impact. If you're below that, it's less than significant.
Okay, and so this table 2 is showing if you had 150 trips, this is what you would
Yes.
generate, but where do we have, where's the?
We
the
did
minimum?
not run the model for this
For this
specific
product?
one. What we're
No.
saying is, in comparison to 150 trips, which the vehicle trips generated by a cannabis farm
Yeah.
or an agricultural activity on 32 acres would be much less than 150 trips a day. And because 150 trips is less than the threshold, or would generate emissions less than the threshold,
And where do we
therefore-
have the threshold in this? document?
that's table 1. So if
I-
150 pounds per day of reactive organic gases would be considered significant. If it's less
I
than
see.
that,
Okay,
it's less than
okay.
significant.
That 150 was throwing me because it was.
And at 150, so it's sort of probably the same number, is a little bit confusing, but at 150 trips per day, we have 2.4 pounds.
Okay,
And if we have, something less than that, it's even less. So that was the analysis that we did that came to the conclusion that it would be less than
I think the
significant.
fact that that's 150 trips and 150
Yes.
is the number.
The number itself is what
Just
caused the
trying to-
confusion, yeah.
Threw me off.
Yeah, correlate those somehow.
Gotcha.
Then at the end of that paragraph, when it says thus the comparison with another approved project, what is the other approved project?
Well, that was the 150 trips a day project, this
Okay.
hypothetical
An example
project.
Not any other
Not any
particular
other-
project,
yeah.
but, okay. Thank you.
That's how I took it.
Yeah.
And let's see. And I shared Commissioner Wooster's concern about calling this an agricultural operation, which I think would have to be clarified as far as whether we should be calling this an agricultural operation, given the provision in the ordinance, cannabis ordinance, not being an agricultural operation. So my concern going into the rest of this hearing is really with the terms of the negative declaration. I don't see where we need to go into anything about co-location, which is a primary concern of Commissioner Wooster, because this would not qualify for co-location. But I am concerned if we're relying upon an environmental impact report that was relying upon different assumptions than the realities that we have here. And I think that when we're dealing with environmental issues, we have to, we haven't written a blank check for environmental concerns that they've all been satisfied by the environmental impact reports having to do with the cannabis ordinance. I think it needs to be very clearly set out in any environmental documents that accompany specific applications, just what has been taken care of in the past and what hasn't, and what effects are yet to be considered, and whether it's appropriate to do it by way of a negative declaration. Having said all that, unless there are environmental considerations that should rule out this application, I think this application is basically a poster child for what the county's ordinance has in mind for an appropriate place to grow cannabis. So that's where I am at this point.
So, I'm unfortunately. I'm kind of in the middle here. I think this is a perfect example project, which unfortunately is kind of the first one that fits this, and you're caught up in it, so you're going to hear everybody's speculation on the appropriate way to handle it. So I do have some concerns in that we have this larger parcel, which does seem to be a poster child parcel. However, there are these smaller parcels directly adjacent that are likely to become rural residential parcels. And we did contemplate that in the cannabis ordinance and those increased clearances. What I'm not clear on here, and which I don't think I need to be clear on because I think it will be addressed in the next stage of this project, is where exactly this grow site is, and does it conform to all those other requirements that we addressed in the cannabis ordinance. So but we are looking here at a zone change, knowing that the purpose of the zone change is to allow the cannabis activities to continue on that site. So this seems appropriate to me, but I think there will be a lot of little environmental issues to be looked at. So what I found a little confusing in reading through this is we have all this really great information, but we keep addressing agricultural operations because it's an RA application. However, we've been really clear that cannabis is not a traditional agricultural operation, and it just seems like to me that we need to find the way to make that clear in our reports. And I'm not criticizing because it's just hard. It's a confusing issue because it's agricultural on one side, but we're not supposed to construe it as agricultural. So that's my biggest concern, is making it really clear that nothing that we could do today in approving a zone change would necessarily ensure that the ultimate application for cannabis operations will be approved, because it could still have other challenges, associated with any of those issues. So I would like to hear from the applicant, just a little background and reassure us. So, are you guys ready to hear?
Yes.
Come on up.
How's everybody doing? So let me give a little bit of background about the property. My father and myself bought the ranch in 2016 with the purposes of having a retirement home, as well as having the farm there with the urgency ordinance that was going into place. We operated there for 2 years. Going into the ban with 0 infractions. Minimized all of our environmental impact with the property, trying to utilize as much of the landscape that was already there when we came in. This was just after the Butte fire, so there was some clearing that had to take place, obviously. But in the 2 years that we operated there, we've never had a complaint from any of the neighbors. To kind of touch on some of the comments that were made, we don't have any direct neighbors. All the small lots that you see on there were all burned down if there was a home on there. I am the only home within all the surrounding lots that you see there. So that is, I know that there was some concern with the 5-acre lots. In the 4 years that we've been there, nothing has ever been rebuilt there. And the people that I do know, the property owners around those, have never complained. I'm in good relations with all of them. I apologize, I'm a little nervous here. I hate kind of talking public speaking. But no, we never had any issues through that whole time period. Kind of furthering some of the points that were brought up, we have no intent to extend to 40,000 or 44,000. We're not going to do the full acre. We're keeping the exact same footprint that we had. So there shouldn't be an additional increase in usage from our well that we originally had in there. It will be the same use that we had prior to the ban. As well as there was also a comment on smell. As far as I know, smell is always going to be something that's an issue with the cannabis side. But for the 2 years of operations that we were there, we've never had any neighbors or any complaints that were ever formally filed or informally mentioned to us for the property as well. What were some other comments that I noticed there?
So you have existing wells on the property?
Yeah, I do. So we came in there, and the owner that had originally built the property were second owners on the property. The well that they had in there was sufficient for the home, but it wasn't going to be sufficient for the whole operation, so I had a new well put in. That well, it was more than ample water usage for what we used for the 2 years that we were there. We never had any water issues as far as pressure dropping down, as far as anything on our end that we ever saw. I know countywide, I know there was a lot of usage that took place. But kind of where we're at in our perspective is I kind of have two options right now. Is either A, I operate with our farm if we're able to rezone, which to us from a financial standpoint, I invested a lot into the property that we're at. It's extremely difficult for me to move and start over at another place. But from just an environmental impact position, for me to take my right of taking my license because we're in good standing and move to somewhere else, I'm going to have to clear, build a new well, build a whole new property versus operating on the exact footprint that I already had going on with no violations, with no issues with the county prior. I was one of the first to actually move forward with the urgency ordinance and with getting licensing with the county and with the state when they originally did it. We've always been tried to be a poster child for the county as far as what we see being a good, legal, well-operated cannabis facility. That's still our goal, and really the only thing that prevents us from being able to do so and move forward with our licensing is this zoning. All of the new regulations in the ordinance, we meet all the requirements, the setbacks, everything that needs to take place, fencing, 100% of that is already done. This is literally the only hurdle we have to get through. And my alternative otherwise is I'll still be able to grow, but I'm going to have to do it somewhere else, which means is that the investment that I've put in, I'm going to eat a lot of money on that, and I'm going to have a much greater impact on the environment having to rebuild somewhere else in addition to that. So to me, this is financially the much more sound option, as well as from a county perspective and the impact perspective, it's a much more sound option for the county.
So do you have 22,000 square feet fenced now?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the entire garden is already built out to the urgency ordinance, but we've already started addressing some of the things like the setback changes. So 100% of the garden is already set up to the new regulations.
Just to make clear, that you are, where the fencing is now, if you cultivated within that fencing, it would satisfy the setback
That is correct.
requirements of it.
That is correct.
You are a poster child.
We tried to make it as easy as possible. When we initially built everything, we built it out with the assumption that this was a long-term investment. Unfortunately, the ban put us in a vicarious position, but the saving grace to that is everything is already turnkey, ready to go to meet the requirements of the county. The only curveball that we got thrown was obviously the RR to RA that we need to change. As I'm sure her presentation went into more than enough detail, everything surrounding us would qualify us for being zoned properly. The 96 general order that zoned it as RR was under completely different assumptions than where we are today. And the new zoning that's going to take place is putting us unclassified all around us would again lend to us being able to move our zoning to the RA standing. So
You have two wells now, a domestic?
one of the wells is no longer operational. I just utilized the new
Okay.
well. Yes, ma'am.
And you live on the property?
I do. I own, so my father and myself own the property. I currently live in Santa Cruz for the last 2 years. I've had to find work elsewhere until I could operate the farm again. But we continued to pay the mortgage and didn't sell with the assumption that we could come back and recoup on some of our investment and move back to the area. So
Did you have an outdoor grow before?
I did.
Would you propose to increase the size of the grow to an acre or somewhere between 22,000 square feet and an acre?
In our particular, there's a lot of undulation to the land where we're at. For me to expand the footprint of the garden to the acre would be not conducive to the lay of the land. I'm a north-facing hill, so to expand upon my footprint would require a lot of further grading and things of that nature, which wouldn't necessarily be conducive to us. If there was any expansion that would take place potentially down the line, it would potentially be with another property and expanding somewhere where there is already an existing property with the requirements. But at this point, we just want, I just want to take it one step at a time. We only want to worry about our 22,000 and the property we have there. I've put all of my personal finances with my father into investing in this property as a long-term investment. My only hope to recoup that is to get it operational again and be able to use the property as we intended it to be used.
Well, you couldn't you, under the ordinance, keep the original site at 22,000 square feet, and if there was another appropriate place on your property, add another half an acre?
No, well, yes and no, but again, the undulation of the land wouldn't allow for that, and the way that if you look at the actual parcel itself is fairly narrow and goes on for a long ways. All of that is through rolling hills. The cost that would be incurred to try to move water and electrical to another end of the property would not be necessarily a smart move. And it's going to cost so much to do that if you can see the bottom right corner, the clearing is where the house was there, and on the left side of that road, all of that is the cultivation which butts up to all of my own land. All of it's rolling hills. The next clearing that I could even use is all the way at the top end, where it's not dark, where it gets so lighter green on the top right there. That actually flattens out, which would be the only other feasible spot to grow. That's about a half mile away. To run the electrical and to run water on that, it'd cost me less to go buy a lot and build out on another property than it would to do it on there. So we're more than happy exactly as it is. We're not greedy. We just want the ability to use the space that we already have in place, and that's it.
So what you're asking us to do is to approve the zoning change on the basis of the existing well and the existing layout of the land, and on your intent to maintain the 22,000 as your maximum.
Exactly.
And with the understanding that if you applied for more, for an expansion under a license application, you would be subject to all the additional, any additional environmental requirements that would come into play.
100%. For us, we understand that if we want to expand on it, we're restarting a lot of the stuff that we already did through the application process. For us, it makes it very easy for me to use the exact same model that I had before to operate now. If I want to try to expand on the footprint, try to clear, now all of a sudden I'm adding all new permits. Now I have to restart on doing the environmental impact for the Water Quality Control Board. There's so many steps that are going to be involved and so many incurred costs that are going to be involved. It makes zero sense for me to change a dang thing right now until we can establish our business and get money coming in. And at that point, then we can reevaluate down the line if we wanted to expand the business out and how and what we would do to do that. But that's not even on our radar.
Any further questions?
No.
Thank you very much. So this would be an opportunity for the public to make comments, but I don't see anyone here, just in case anyone's out there in the lobby waiting. We'll bring it back to the commissioners, further discussion, and any further questions for Madeline or Peter.
Well, I think we should be considering this on the basis of what is currently before us and what the assurances we have from the applicant. Because if it turns out that you have a complete change of personality and ambition and et cetera, and you want to do a lot more, that's going to be subject to county review at that time for the environmental impacts that might have upon it. So I am still very favorably inclined toward this particular application for rezoning, but I do think that we need some clarification in the environmental document as to just what is being relied upon and how does that apply to the current actual facts on the ground. Because I think we do have an obligation to make sure that the particular application has has or just what environmental impacts this particular application would have.
So if I could respond to that, we have to look at what the potential use of the land is based on the zoning, not just what a particular applicant has requested. Now, we need to look at the specifics of what the applicant has requested. You probably remember the, was a parcel map application for the West Point Dollar General. And we actually got more wrapped up around the proposal than it was the parcel map. But, that's the way that it works. In this case, we're looking at both the specific proposal to reactivate, reapply for a cultivation permit under the new ordinance, as well as any potential modification to, the uses that would be allowed in the RA zone versus the RR zone. So we can't just say, well, even though he says that he only wants to grow half an acre, he would have the right to apply under 1795 to grow a full acre. He would have the right to do any other use that is allowed in the RA zone, but what we found in reviewing it was that based on parcel size, those changes are really very limited and would not have a significant impact. In response to some of Commissioner Wooster's comments, when the board certified the EIR, they found that the modified mitigation measures provided comparable mitigation to the impacts. And while I know that there was disagreement on that when it was before the Planning Commission, and there was some disagreement among the board members, the majority of the board found that the EIR was adequate. It adequately addressed all of the impacts other than those that were found to be significant and unavoidable. And so the issue particularly of the well testing changes that were made in the ordinance by the board were found to provide similar or comparable level of mitigation. That's under litigation. We had a court hearing 2 weeks ago, and the board rejected a proposal to put a preliminary injunction against the county. The judge found that there was relatively small chance for the plaintiffs to prevail in that case, but it's still not, it's not over. But it's, the finding of the board was that the mitigation measures that were imposed and the conditions, the requirements of the ordinance satisfied those requirements. And I don't think that this is the venue to re-argue, the adequacy of the EIR. That has been found to be adequate, at least by the board at this point in time. So the question then is whether or not we have adequately described the effect of this project in light of the certified EIR and our negative declaration. I think that there could be some additional discussion added that more closely relates this proposal to the findings of the EIR and the mitigation measures. If that would make the commission more comfortable, we can maybe continue this item and provide some additional documentation to support that. That's an option before you today. We could also, if I've heard 3 board members that were apparently willing to recommend to the board to approve this, if you felt that the discussion was adequate, you could certainly take an action today to move it forward to the board. But it's really up to you how comfortable you feel on, that the environmental document is sufficient to address the potential impact of this zoning amendment and the relying on the provisions of the ordinance and the measures that were incorporated, and mitigation measures from the EIR that were incorporated in that ordinance.
I think your statement is extremely clear. And I think this environmental document could benefit from that sort of clarification as to what's really before us and what the county has approved going forward. So I would appreciate, and especially since this is the first application we've had of this sort, a clarification within the environmental document as to just upon what are you relying and why is that reliance appropriate. Your statement has made me feel much more comfortable, but that's not on in the documentary record yet. That's my own feeling.
Okay. The findings that are part of the ordinance don't address the change with respect to the well monitoring, and they don't address co-location. And is there some other document that does?
You took the findings of this, in this resolution?
No, the findings in the ordinance, the cannabis regulation 17.95 has a set of findings in section 3 that are part of the ordinance. Are those the?
There was also the findings of fact document that was adopted by the Board of Supervisors in addition to the ordinance findings. It was a 75-page document that looked at, it wasn't part of what the Planning Commission reviewed. It was provided to the board after the board declared their intent to adopt the ordinance and to certify the EIR. Typically, it's sort of the last document prepared. It says, based on the direction of the board, here is the factual basis for that. So there was a separate document that was adopted by the board that addressed the changes to the mitigation measures and the factual basis for finding that, this impact was mitigated or not mitigated, what the overriding considerations were. And that was something that the board adopted when they took their final action.
Okay. And was there a hearing in which there was evidence taken to support those findings
Yes,
before the board?
before the board, yes.
I think we're mixing and matching things here just a little bit. And maybe all of us need a little bit of an education on where the cannabis ordinance ended up, because we all remember all the things we discussed at length, sometimes at great length. But I think that the ultimate issue before us today is we're relying on the environmental document that the board adopted, not the environmental document that we discussed. And so that's what's before us today. We don't need to get into whether we personally agree with any of the modifications they made or didn't make. So my biggest concern here is really just that we be really clear that while we know the proposed use for this piece of property, and we know what ultimately could be allowed by the zone change, so we need to look at both of those things, what's been stated, but what could happen in the future, because there's nothing that would stop anybody other than just the practicality of this parcel, and we do need to take that into consideration. Would it even be practical for something else to happen here? But we're really looking only at those items, and the guts, the details of the cannabis ordinance will be applied when he applies for that permit. So that's a different level of scrutiny on the actual project. For compliance, I probably wandered a little bit there, but so I am comfortable with moving forward with it, but I'm also interested in us coming up with sort of a template for the future when we address these on the kinds of things that we want to see in the resolution and the negative declaration or mitigated negative declaration, whatever we end up with. So that's my concern. I don't want to hold up the applicant. I don't know what everybody else is going to say here, but I feel like it behooves us to settle on a way to handle these in the future so that we don't end up doing this each time.
And I think a way of doing that is to really come up with a template environmental document that makes clear exactly where we are and what the document is relying upon and therefore what we should be relying upon. I certainly don't think that this document for this case needs to have anything to do with co-location. I don't understand why it's even being discussed today.
Because potentially somebody
On this,
could come forward.
on this property, 20 acres, there can be no co-location.
It's 30 some odd acres.
32, yeah.
Yeah.
But the minimum for co-location is what? Was it 100 acres?
40.
40,
Yeah.
okay, so
Right, so
today,
you're right on this particular.
today it's not before us, so, anyhow, I think since the actual, we're not impeding this applicant's actual planting of cannabis now, thank you, because nobody currently is authorized to plant cannabis. I think if we could continue this enough to have the environmental document and perhaps some of the statements in the staff report about the well and stuff amended to make more clear just what the issues are that we're considering, I think it might serve us well in the future as your template that you're talking about. I would ask the planning commission, how long do you think it would take to
I just have a
make such change?
couple more comments. I understand from the applicant that the neighbors got burned out and nobody's rebuilt, but they would have the right to rebuild. And so I think that whatever's done here has to take that into consideration. That otherwise, you're basically telling them if they don't like the orders that may exist, they can't rebuild. And I'm still concerned about the underlying environmental documents because the only actual environmental document that I know of is the draft environmental impact report and the final and the addendum. I don't know of any supplemental EIR that was conducted by anybody. And so I still have the same concerns about relying upon those existing environmental documents for the reasons that I've stated.
However, that issue is behind us because the board has chosen to adopt their version of those environmental documents in support of the ordinance, which of course is still being litigated. But it's not up to us today to decide whether or not that environmental document is adequate. Our opportunity to comment on that was back when we were working on the cannabis ordinance. Whether we agree with the changes made or not made or what came out of all of that, it's still the applicants today can only rely on what was adopted by the board. I just don't think we can get into that as part of this particular process. You know, if we want to look at something again, that's a whole different issue. And I think whether the board wants the planning commission to be trying to further amend that document is a different question. It's possible something will come back to us at some point, but right now, we have to work with the document that was adopted, regardless of our opinion of it.
Well, the commission is being asked to approve the initial study and negative declaration the staff report relies in part on the environmental documents that were done in connection with the ordinance. I think, at least I have an obligation to use my best judgment on whether I think that's adequate. And I don't. And so it may be a foregone conclusion that the board is going to stick to what it's already done. But I don't think that I'm in a position to rubber stamp, if you will, a document that I do not think is adequate. And I don't. And it's both because of the reliance on the underlying environmental document and the addendum, and because of the way the initial study negative declaration was done here with respect to specific points.
Right, so I think any comments on the study for this particular application are completely appropriate. And that, I think that's what we're talking about with coming up with. What are the things that we need to say to tie everything together? But the specifics of the actual document adopted by the board, there's no real value in us speculating on what we'd like to see in them. Just my opinion.
And I go back to, the discussions about where we wanted to allow cannabis in the county. And it was very strongly spoken of against in rural residential areas. And there was a reason for that, because that's where all the complaints came from. And this is going to be surrounded by rural residential lots, and we don't, this was one of the fears we had going into this, is people just will, we'll say, no, we don't want it in this area. There was a reason we didn't want it in that area. Well, we'll just change the zoning and allow it. Well, we don't have to change the zoning. The zoning's fine the way it is. It was zoned rural residential, and I think it should stay rural residential. There was a reason why we didn't include that. Originally, we didn't include RA. We didn't want anything with residential on it, but that got changed. And this is exactly the problem why we didn't want that, is because now we're seeing it happen. It's going to come before us. We're going to keep wanting to change these and allow it in areas where it's going to continue the problems that we had before. The reason we looked and went over the whole regulation so heavily, and the reason that comes up is because it says here on the first page that the applicant has expressed a desire to continue the use of the land for commercial cannabis. That is part of what we're considering. That's in the in the conclusion, that they're considering this for commercial cannabis. They want to change it for that reason. So I have to go back to, there was a lot of reason why we had the discussion of not allowing it in these areas. And so now we're going, well, let's just throw that all out, because we'll just change the zoning and put it where it's going to cause problems, when that was what we were trying to avoid to begin with. So I just can't see changing this and creating a situation where we're going to have, again, the same problems. And this is, like I said, like a test case. Believe me, more are going to come. We're going to have other properties that are going to be next to rural residential areas. And so we're going to set a precedent now that we're just going to go ahead and rubber stamp all these going forward, and saying, because you want to grow cannabis, you get to grow it. Your neighbors, too bad. They're just going to have to smell it. I just can't go there myself. I'm sorry. I'll have to vote against this.
Well, you look at where this property is. I mean, actually, it's not very far from my home, but I'm 5.5 miles away. This is rural Calaveras County. I'm not sure how many other RA parcels there would be in this county that would be more appropriate for a cannabis cultivation. We have an established plot of land that we understand the owner is planning on using, and has fencing that complies with the current ordinance, cannabis ordinance. I think, if it's commendable that the applicant is very forthright in saying, I'm going to grow cannabis here. That's why I want this change. There's been criticism of people that come before us and say, well, I'm doing this for some other reasons, and then there was a vote against that person because there was an implied intent to grow cannabis. Here we have a clear situation where the applicant is being perfectly above board, and I think in its appropriate property, if any property is appropriate to grow cannabis, this probably is one of the most appropriate, and I think it's what the Board of Supervisors had in mind when they provided the current ordinance. So I really have no problem with the rezoning, except I would like to have the environmental document be clearer so we could have a very clear understanding on the record of what the environmental considerations are that we're passing this request on.
Brett, do you have something to
Yes,
say?
I do, thank you. When I got this packet, I looked at it, went over it, and before I even got past the project description, I knew what this was about and why it was being requested to be rezoned. And the way I looked at it is this within the ordinance, the commercial cannabis ordinance? Yes. Is this an acceptable use for the RA zone? Yes. Did we have that discussion? The board certified the EIR on this. This resolution is not to revisit the cannabis ordinance or EIR. It's just in fact to change a parcel from RR to RA. And that's how I looked at this. And we could beat a dead horse, we can beat this thing to death over EIR, who believes what little portion of the EIR is not adequate or whatever. That's not our place right here and now to discuss. That's been, the EIR has been certified by the Board of Supervisors. The ordinance has been passed by the Board of Supervisors. So what we have in front of us is whether or not this meets the requirements to change a parcel from rural residential to RA. I believe all the requirements are met. I don't see an issue with this, regardless if it is going to be used for cannabis, orchards, cattle. It fits the requirements of that, and therefore I am in favor of this resolution.
So I think the real question here is, Peter and Madeline, are you clear on the concerns about the negative declaration language, and how long would it take to tweak that? So how quickly could we get this back on the agenda if we were to not vote on it today?
Well, I don't want to commit to any specific date because you never know what's going to happen. But I think the earliest we could bring it back would be the second meeting in March. Could be, in April, but certainly wouldn't be the next meeting. But we'd have to, modify it and then re-advertise.
Would it help to amend the resolution, the first and second sections, to add language regarding reliance on the EIR of the ordinance, as well as in the second section discussing the requirements of Chapter 1795?
I think that I would be hesitant to try to craft language on the fly here at the hearing, and as long as the applicant is willing to accept a continuance, like it doesn't really, but
Yeah.
it might be to the applicant's benefit to, wait a couple of meetings so we can, have higher comfort level by the majority of
Yes.
the commission.
I initially thought we could slide something in there, but it seems like we could make it worse. So what do the commissioners feel is the appropriate action at this moment?
I'd appreciate a clarification from the chair. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to wait until the other three, if they all,
We're gonna
every
go- I'm going this
question?
way now.
Okay.
I'm trying to mix it up.
I'd-
And then I'm gonna try to go from the middle out, but
yeah.
you know, we're gonna.
No, I appreciate
I'm
that.
starting here because you were concerned about the language.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just-
Well, I would ask the applicant if continuation of this matter until probably the second meeting in March and maybe the first meeting in April, how would that affect you?
Completely being forthright, every month that goes by is costing me a lot of money, and even if I'm approved by you and then I get on the board of
Could you come up to the microphone, please? Thank you.
Every month that goes by, I've already been paying a mortgage for 2 years with a property that I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars into something that I can't recoup until we have that place operational. So we're already on the clock as far as we're concerned. Obviously, if for you guys to feel comfortable with the decision you have to make, any time that you need is obviously what you need to take. From my perspective, another month and a half is going to mean that my license is going to be pushed back another month and a half to actually receive the annual, which means that this year is likely completely done, because by the timeline of that, of getting the annual and everything, it's probably going to push us into end of summer before I could even plant at that point. I'm on the clock right now to try to get our annual license by July to salvage off a season. That's given me about a 4-month period with the timeline I'm looking at. If we were to approve today, I would be on the docket next month for the Board of Supervisors, at which time, if we are approved at that point, I would be able to immediately move forward with the annual and get the good standing license. That would give me a 3-month window to be approved for the annual and complete any county. Once I start pushing beyond that, this season is pretty much lost for an outdoor season. So I'm on the clock right now to try to recoup this year.
You can't proceed with any of that in parallel. You have to have your board of supervisors action.
I can't take any steps further with the annual or with the county. Pre-application's been taken care of and we've done the preemptive things that we can do, but I cannot move forward with the actual county application nor the state application until the zoning is reapproved, or is approved. So all that is on hold until this takes place. So even though a month or a couple weeks or a month may not seem like much, it could be the difference between us possibly salvaging a season off this year or having to wait till next year to have a season. So it does have a pretty substantial impact for me personally. Not that I want everybody to be comfortable. I don't want to rush a decision that could be negative to the outcome for us. So obviously all the time is necessary, but it does have a pretty big impact on our business and our ability to move forward.
Well, I would encourage the planning commissioner to try and get this on as soon a hearing as possible. I'm sorry to put the onus on you, but I think the environmental documents do need to be clarified, and the resolution as to exactly what basis we're asked, and what basis, if the resolution passes, what basis we're making our environmental decisions on.
So I don't think that any additional information that we would add to clarify the document would necessitate recirculation of the environmental document. If the commission wanted to continue it to a date certain, the next meeting, we would do what we need to do to get the additional information. And I'm being told that the next meeting's already been noticed. But if it's continued from here, we don't have to send out new notice. We would need to amend the agenda. The only challenge is information that's been provided to you today addresses the concerns of the majority, that you could recommend this onto the board one way or the other with directive to maybe add some additional information for the board's consideration when they review this. So there's another option for you.
That's kind of where I was headed with it. So it's a question of, are we comfortable voting on this today with, given all of our discussion and the information, everybody has formed their opinion with the direction to the staff to clean up this environmental
What we would do, and this would be similar to a situation where someone commented on the adequacy of the environmental document, and we would then respond to those comments in writing, does not necessitate recirculation because it didn't raise, new environmental effects or modified the mitigation to the point that it would require recirculation. So what we would do would be to add some additional discussion, not necessarily modify the document, but do an addendum to the initial study and to the negative declaration that discussed the issues that were raised here today. And now, if you were the final decision maker on this, I would say we wouldn't be able to take action, but your action is an advisory to the board, and so as part of that advice, you would say, well, why don't you add some additional clarification to the information for the board's consideration on how you came to those conclusions.
But I personally feel I need additional clarification before I can pass it on.
And
So
that's within your purview.
that's really was the question.
I would like to continue it to the next meeting and see what we come up with. I would like to get this onto the board as soon as possible. And I think, your statement was very clear, but I think we're passing upon what's before us, and I feel an obligation to make sure that the basis for my decision is in the documents before me. So I hate to put the pressure on the department to clarify things for me, but I think the application has made it, or the applicant has made it very clear that time is not only money, but time is a season that is in jeopardy. So I would like to see something at the next meeting, and I'd like to continue it to the next meeting, if it's appropriate for a motion for that.
Are we saying to the 12th of March? So the packets would need to go out tomorrow?
Well, when the body of planning commission continues something to the next meeting, we don't have to recirculate the entire packet. We would just provide you the additional information, provide the applicant, provide any interest
several houses